What secrets are hidden in the world's darkest caves? From ancient skeletons with living descendants to creatures that have never seen the sun. These discoveries sound more like science fiction than history, but every single one of them is real. Caves have always been mysterious places, silent, dark, and untouched for thousands, sometimes millions of years. But step inside, and you find stories frozen in time. From giant bird claws with flesh still on them, to translucent snails crawling deep underground, to the oldest signs of archery and winemaking, these caves have revealed some of the strangest and most shocking discoveries in history. Tonight, we'll journey into the depths of these hidden worlds and uncover what humanity has almost forgotten. And before we descend into the darkness, don't forget to support the Terrifying Mystery channel by liking this video, subscribing, and activating the bell icon so you never miss the mysteries waiting in the shadows. Let's begin. In 1987, a team of archaeologists from New Zealand's Speleological Society found something incredible: a claw from a moa, a bird that's been extinct for centuries. What really got everyone talking was that it wasn't just bone. There were still bits of muscle and flesh clinging to it. Moa birds were something else. They lived only in New Zealand, and there were actually 8 different kinds. Some were about the size of a turkey, but others were huge, like 12 feet tall and weighing as much as 500 pounds. It's hard to even picture a bird that big walking around. Scientists figured out the claw was around 3,300 years old, which just shows how long these birds called New Zealand home. When photos of the claw started spreading online, it really caught people's attention. Social media blew up with comments and reactions. A lot of folks were just amazed that something so old could still have flesh on it. It looked like something from a sci-fi movie, which makes sense. You don't see a preserved creature from the past every day. Even Mark Hamill, who played Luke Skywalker, noticed it on Twitter. He joked that the claw looked like the hand of a rancor, that big reptile alien from Return of the Jedi. A team of cavers and biologists were exploring deep in Croatia's Lukinijama Trojama cave system when they came across something no one had ever laid eyes on before. They found a completely new kind of snail. What really stood out was that these snails were see-through. These snails are part of the Zooespium genus, and they live way down in the dark, about 3,200 feet below the surface. They've adapted to a life without light, and because of that, they're blind. It's a strange thought, living your whole life in pitch blackness. The cave itself is no simple hole in the ground. It's one of the deepest caves in the world, actually ranked in the top 20. You go into a place like that expecting the unexpected, and sure enough, that's what the team found. As we went further into the cave, we kept picking up animal specimens. At one point, we found this tiny snail that was just completely different from anything we'd seen. We ended up calling it Zooespium thallosum. It really was something else. Its shell was translucent, almost like a little dome made of glass. Pretty beautiful, actually. And like you'd expect from a snail, they weren't in any hurry. They move maybe a few millimeters in a week, sometimes just going in circles. They seem happy enough, just grazing slowly in their dark, comfortable cave. We took our new find to a taxonomist in Germany, Alexander Weigand. He looked it over and told us it was a brand new species, totally unknown to science. It makes you think there's still a whole world down there right under our feet. The oldest bow and arrow technology we know of was found in a cave in Sri Lanka. It's pretty amazing to think that people were using bows and arrows there around 48,000 years ago. That makes it the earliest sign of archery in that part of the world. The cave is called Fa Hien Lena, over in the southwest part of the country. Researchers were digging around and came across more than just arrowheads. They also found these carefully made beads, decorated with red mineral ochre and shells from sea snails. What's really interesting is that this isn't just a big deal for South Asia. It might actually be the oldest evidence of archery anywhere in Eurasia. It makes you realize how inventive people were even that long ago. According to the researchers, this discovery tells us something interesting about our early human ancestors. It looks like they really knew how to adapt to different environments, and they had a pretty diverse set of tools to work with. You have to give them credit for being so resourceful. The projectile points they found were made from animal bone and were about 48,000 years old, but they were found in a layer that was a bit younger, closer to 14,000 years old. And those decorative beads they uncovered? Turns out they were attached to arrows using a bow and arrow technique. It's a strange thought, isn't it? Hunting something like a rabbit with an arrowhead made from beads. Archaeologists are pretty surprised by this find. It really challenges the old story that all the big human innovations started in Africa and Europe. It seems like we might have been overlooking other places. South Asia, for example, is looking more and more like a real hub of ancient ingenuity. The people who lived in Sri Lanka back then, they were clearly doing things their own way, and they were onto something clever. Imagine finding an ancient skeleton and realizing it's a relative of yours from thousands of years ago. That's what happened to a history teacher back in 1903 when a 9,000-year-old skeleton was uncovered in a cave in Cheddar, England. Nobody knew at the time, but years later, a man named Adrian Target, who taught history and lived nearby, turned out to be a direct descendant. 300 generations separated them, which is just hard to wrap your head around. Because of that, the skeleton is often called the most distant relative ever confirmed. It turns out that a DNA test on Adrian's maternal line showed a genetic match with Cheddar Man, the oldest complete skeleton ever found in Britain. Cheddar Man lived around 7150 BC, way before farming even started. It's kind of wild to think someone alive today shares that kind of ancient connection. This all came out while they were making a TV show called Once Upon a Time in the West. Makes you wonder how much of the past we still carry in us without even knowing. A TV show did a segment on the history of Somerset, and they decided to look into the archaeology of the area. As part of it, they ran DNA tests on 20 local people whose families have been from that region for a long time. The analysis was handled by a team at Oxford University from their Institute of Molecular Medicine. They compared the DNA from those people with some genetic material that was taken from inside a tooth of the Cheddar Man skeleton. It's interesting to think about that connection. The skeleton itself was first discovered in Gough's Cave, which is in Cheddar Gorge. That cave is a really important site for finding remains from the Paleolithic era. Here in England, a pretty amazing discovery has given us a new look at how early farming might have started. It kind of changes what we thought we knew about how agriculture spread across Western Europe. Looking at the remains of Cheddar Man, it seems like farming might have been something that local groups figured out on their own. For a long time, the main idea was that farmers moved here from Eastern Europe and brought the knowledge with them. This new finding makes you wonder if that's the whole story. It really makes you think about how things actually happened back then. The way different groups met and shared ideas was probably a lot more complicated than we assumed. It's one of those things that shows how much we're still learning about our own past. Thinking about Cheddar Man's life, it's hard not to picture him moving through thick, ancient forests. He was a hunter-gatherer, so his days would have been shaped by what he could find. Hunting deer, or maybe setting traps for rabbits, gathering nuts and roots when they were in season. It feels like a constant search for food. Cheddar Gorge itself must have been a good spot to call home. The natural shelters there, plus a fresh spring nearby, would have made things a little easier. You imagine a small group of families, all relying on each other. And looking at him, he wouldn't seem strange to us at all. He had dark skin and dark hair from what scientists can tell. If you saw him in modern clothes walking down a street today, he'd just look like anyone else. It's a funny thought, that connection across so much time.
It's interesting to think about early humans wearing clothes made from leather and animal skins. They lived in a time before farming changed everything, even though woolly mammoths were already gone by then. Modern humans have been around for a very long time, something like 300,000 years. The main thing that set them apart physically was their brain size, which was already as big as ours is today. But some scientists think the way our brains work now, more modern, might only have developed about 100,000 years ago. When you look at it that way, 9,000 years really isn't very long at all in the grand scheme of evolution. It helps put things into perspective, like with the Cheddar Man discovery. It's interesting to think that someone like Adrian Target would fit right in today. The family connection between him and Cheddar Man is pretty incredible, far closer than most people have to their ancient ancestors. I was reading that even the royal family only traces back to a king from around 829 AD. But the link between Cheddar Man and Adrian stretches back so much further. It really makes you think about how we're all tied to the deep past in ways we don't usually realize.
It sounds like something from a fantasy story, a cave full of giant crystals, but sometimes the real world is just as strange as our imaginations. Deep under the Sierra de Nica mountain in Chihuahua, Mexico, there's a hidden place that's hard to even picture. They call it the Giant Crystal Cave. It's way down there, about 1,000 feet underground. The cave is filled with these incredible gypsum crystals, like something you wouldn't believe unless you saw it. They're like huge pillars, and they've been growing quietly for hundreds of thousands of years. Some are so big, they reach right across the cave. It reminds people of Superman's Fortress of Solitude, which is a pretty cool comparison. You can't actually go visit it, though. It's not open to tourists, and honestly, that's probably a good thing. The place is seriously dangerous, super hot and humid. Even scientists have a tough time getting permission to go in. It makes you wonder how a place like that even formed in the first place. Beneath the mountain, ancient fault lines worked like pathways, letting magma push its way up toward the surface. That was almost 26 million years ago. It's how the mountain itself came to be, and it set the stage for those incredible crystals to form later on. For tens of thousands of years, groundwater filled what we now call the Crystal Cave. That water was heated from below by a magma chamber still sitting deep underground. It carried a mineral called anhydrite. At really high temperatures, above 136 degrees Fahrenheit, anhydrite stays as it is. But when things cool down, it dissolves and then reforms as gypsum. That change can go back and forth depending on the heat. The magma under the cave kept the water just warm enough, creating the right conditions for something special to happen over a very, very long time. Over time, the water cooled down, dropping below 136 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when things started to change. The anhydrite began to break apart, letting calcium and sulfate seep into the water. Those particles slowly came back together, crystallizing into something new, a special kind of gypsum called selenite. The cave turned into this quiet, almost dreamlike place filled with pale selenite crystals. They rested in the water, protected from big swings in temperature. And they just kept growing, slowly, as if time didn't really matter to them.
Joseph Henry Loveless was far from a saint. Back in 1916, he was arrested on suspicion of murdering his wife Agnes with an axe. But Loveless was a clever man. He had a small saw blade hidden in his shoe, and he used it to cut his way out of jail. After that, he just disappeared. Then, in 1979, a family made a grim discovery in Buffalo Cave, Idaho.
they found a headless torso stuffed inside a burlap sack. It was unsettling, to say the least. Years later, in 1991, someone came across a hand nearby. That got people looking, and eventually they found the legs and one of the arms. It took a long time, but little by little the pieces started to fit. 18 years after the first discovery, they finally ran a DNA test. The remains turned out to be Lovelace himself. The man named Lovelace apparently had no love for his own grandson, who is nearly 90 years old now. That grandson actually gave his own DNA to confirm the family connection, which finally put the mystery to rest. It's strange to think that even though we know who he was, nobody really knows how Lovelace died. There's some talk that Agnes's family, still angry and wanting revenge, might have found him and taken matters into their own hands. In Romania, there's a cave that was cut off from the outside world for millions of years. Researchers finally got inside not too long ago. It's called Movile Cave, and honestly, the conditions in there are pretty harsh. There's no light at all, and the air is actually toxic. But somehow life found a way. There's a whole ecosystem living in there, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. Workers first stumbled on the cave back in 1986 while looking for a place to put a power plant. After that, the authorities decided to keep access really limited. Down in the cave, the air is strange. It has way less oxygen than we're used to, and a lot of carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide. It's been in total darkness for all those millions of years without a single ray of sunlight. It feels like a completely different world. Back in 1996, a team of biologists from the University of Cincinnati decided to check out Movile Cave because the conditions there are so intense. They ended up finding 48 different species, and honestly, that's a lot for a place like that. What's really interesting is that 33 of those species aren't found anywhere else in the world. You've got spiders and pseudoscorpions living down there, along with woodlice, centipedes, and even leeches and snails. Living in total darkness for so long, most of them have lost their sight and their color. There's just no need for those things when there's no light. Instead, they've developed really long legs and antennae to help them feel their way around. But the most surprising thing about Movile Cave might be how it survives. It's the first ecosystem on land that we know of that runs on chemosynthetic bacteria. That means instead of depending on the sun, life down there gets its energy from chemicals. It's a strange and self-contained little world. Most life on Earth runs on sunlight thanks to photosynthesis, but down in this cave, things work differently. The bacteria there get their energy from chemical reactions, like breaking down sulfide or ammonium. It reminds me a bit of those strange ecosystems around deep-sea vents where life thrives without any sun. But here's the thing, this cave doesn't have those tight partnerships you see in the ocean, where microbes and animals depend on each other. Even though scientists have known about this place for decades, it still feels like there's a lot we don't quite get. The deep ocean still holds so many secrets. Scientists think there are probably countless creatures down there we haven't even found yet. Some of those unknown species might teach us a lot about how life evolves, or even what life really is. It makes you realize how much we still don't know about where life can exist. If living things can survive in such a tough environment, it really opens up possibilities. It makes you wonder what else might be out there, maybe even in our own solar system. Deep in an Italian cave, something incredible was found. It tells us a bit more about the people who came long before us. They call him the Altamora Man. His skeleton is about 170,000 years old. They found him back in 1993, tucked away in the Lamalunga caves. It was a big deal for scientists because it's the oldest Neanderthal skeleton they've ever gotten DNA from. The tricky part was the skull. It was really fragile, kind of locked in place by all the cave formations like stalactites. They couldn't just take it apart for a full study without risking damage. So they made a choice to leave things as they were to protect what was left. But that wasn't the whole story. The big moment happened when scientists got DNA from the Altamora Man's shoulder blade. These ancient bits of genetic material could be around 170,000 years old. It's pretty amazing to think what they might tell us about how Neanderthals actually lived. This isn't just any old fossil either. One of the researchers said it might be the most complete non-human skeleton ever discovered. Almost every bone is there, from top to bottom. It really gives you a clear, almost whole picture of someone from so long ago. But even with all that, figuring out exactly where Altamota man fits in our family tree is still a puzzle. Figuring out this skeleton was a real challenge. It had the usual Neanderthal look in the face and skull, but then there were these massive brow ridges, way bigger than anything we've seen on others. That really complicated things. On top of that, part of the skeleton is still stuck in the rock, so we can't even get a full look at it. The radiocarbon dating came back with some pretty amazing numbers, placing it at somewhere between 130,000 and 170,000 years old. It's an incredible find, though it's not actually the oldest Neanderthal fossil we have.
It's pretty wild to think that people were roasting root vegetables 170,000 years ago. Scientists found some charred bits of veggies buried in ash deep inside a cave in South Africa. They say it's the oldest evidence of roasted roots anyone's ever come across. I always figured early humans were mostly hunting big animals like mammoths, but it turns out they had a more balanced diet than that. They were already cooking up vegetables, probably for the energy. It makes you realize how resourceful they must have been, finding food that could keep them going. It seems archaeologists have found that our ancestors ate a pretty balanced diet, with a good mix of carbs and proteins. They really knew how to keep their meals varied. But figuring that out wasn't simple. Researchers spent years looking at charred bits of stuff under microscopes, sort of like detectives piecing together a puzzle. Eventually, they realized those bits were actually rhizomes from a plant called hypoxis. Rhizomes are basically the underground stems of some plants, kind of like hidden treasures buried in the soil. So you're probably curious about what those hypoxis rhizomes actually taste like. They're not your typical potato, that's for sure. They have this kind of yam-like flavor, which makes them pretty unique. It looks like early humans were really into them for their starchy goodness. They used to eat these roasted vegetables a lot, which we know because archaeologists have found tons of rhizome fragments. It was clearly a regular part of their meals. It's interesting because it makes you rethink the whole idea that our ancestors were just big meat eaters all the time. It's a common mistake to think of our ancient ancestors as just meat eaters. They actually had a real appreciation for plants and understood the need for a balanced diet. Of course, not all types of hypoxis plants were the same. There's one kind, the African potato, that's pretty bitter and was used more as medicine than food. The people living in Border Cave likely preferred a different species with white fleshy roots that were much more pleasant to eat. It makes you wonder how they figured all that out.
Deep in a cave in southern France, there's something that makes you stop and think. It's a set of rings built from stalagmites, and they've been sitting there for about 175,000 years. You can still see marks from fires on them. It turns out Neanderthals built these structures. It's strange to imagine them carefully stacking hundreds of these stone columns into circles, not just one, but two. They carried them from deeper in the cave and arranged them deliberately. The cave itself is massive, and these rings were found really far inside, over 1,000 feet from the entrance. It makes you wonder what they were doing so deep underground. The whole thing feels both mysterious and strangely familiar, like a quiet message from a distant past. One of the structures was a neat 7-foot circle. The other one was kind of an odd oval shape, about 15 feet across and 22 feet long. But the really strange part was that both of them looked like they'd been burned. It makes you wonder why anyone would set these rings on fire. That's the part that even the experts haven't figured out yet. What's really surprising is how this changes what we thought about Neanderthals.
The old idea was that they were just simple people living in caves. This discovery makes it seem like there was a lot more going on.
They even expressed themselves artistically. It's kind of surprising when you think about it. Our ancient relatives had a real talent for building things and being creative. It seems we really underestimated how clever those ancient builders were. The researchers are saying it couldn't have been done by just one person. It had to be a group effort, which means they had some kind of social structure and knew how to work together. You have to wonder about the conversations they must have had, the planning involved. Some Neanderthals were probably holding lights, while others moved rocks and placed them in a specific way. It's kind of like a construction site from a time way before any of our modern tools. We still don't know exactly what these structures were for. Maybe they were used as simple shelters for a short time, or perhaps they meant something more, something spiritual to them. It's hard to say for sure. It's pretty clear that making these things took a lot of skill and planning. You could tell they had an eye for design, too. Those early people were really the architects of their day. It makes you realize Neanderthals were just as capable as early humans in a lot of ways. They were good at hunting and fishing. Inside a cave in France, they found some footprints that tell a pretty interesting story about people and dogs. The prints are really old, like 26,000 years old. And they make you wonder if humans and dogs have been friends for much longer than we thought. Most people figured dogs were domesticated around 15,000 years ago, but this discovery might change that. The footprints show a child walking next to what was probably a wolf or an early dog. They were side by side, just moving through the cave together. The tracks go on for about 150 feet, all pressed into clay that hardened and kept them safe all this time. The footprints were found in the Chauvet Cave back in 1994, which is how the cave got its name, from Jean-Marie Chauvet. It's interesting to imagine what it must have been like deep inside that cave. A child, maybe 8 or 10 years old, was walking through those dark tunnels. It seems they weren't alone. There was a wolf, or maybe an early dog, walking alongside them. You can tell the child was carrying a torch because there's a charcoal smudge on the wall where they stopped to clean it off. But this isn't just a story about a kid and an animal hanging out together. It really makes you rethink the whole timeline of when dogs and people first started forming bonds. It kind of changes what we thought we knew.
You know, I always heard that wolves started hanging around human camps after the last ice age, and that's how dogs came to be. But it turns out that might not be the whole story. New discoveries, like ancient footprints in places such as Chauvet Cave, are changing things. Scientists, using better DNA methods, are finding that our history with dogs goes way further back than we realized. It wasn't really about humans domesticating wolves in a one-sided way. It feels more like we kind of evolved together, helping each other out. The bond seems to have been built on something mutual, like respect and shared needs, rather than just people taking charge. It's interesting to think about how early humans and wolves started working together. They probably recognized that they lived in similar social groups and had the same goals when it came to hunting. You had to really understand what the other was thinking or feeling for that kind of partnership to work. It makes you look at things differently, knowing that dogs have been with us for over 30,000 years. They weren't just animals back then, they were companions. It's strange that we don't see them in cave paintings like we see other creatures. Maybe that means they were seen as something more special, not just another part of the landscape. The connection we have with dogs isn't a new thing. It's a story that goes back further than we can easily imagine.
You know how people always say wine gets better as it gets older? Well, what if you found what might just be the oldest wine ever? It's kind of wild to think about. Researchers were exploring this cave in Sicily, and they came across something nobody expected. They found signs that people were making wine in Italy more than 6,000 years ago. That really changes what we thought we knew about how far back winemaking goes. And the interesting part is, it wasn't only grapes they were using. Makes you wonder what else went into that ancient drink. Researchers studying ancient farming made a surprising find. They realized the residue they were looking at was actually from wine. It felt like hitting the jackpot, discovering 5 organic samples of the stuff inside terracotta jars from the Copper Age. These jars had been sitting for centuries in a limestone cave on Sicily's southwest coast. They dated all the way back to the 4th millennium BCE. The real question was how they could be sure it was wine. The answer came down to tartaric acid and its salt, which people sometimes call cream of tartar. Those are signature components you find in grapes, especially when wine is being made. For the researchers, it was like finding the Holy Grail. It's pretty clear now that these old jars were used for wine, which is a big deal for a few reasons. This is the oldest sign of wine anyone has found in Italy from prehistoric times. For a while, scientists figured winemaking only got started there around 1200 BC, probably after the Greeks showed up. But this new find makes that timeline seem off by a few thousand years. It's kind of wild to think how much we're still learning about the past. Sicily has always been known for its wine, and it turns out that tradition goes back even further than anyone realized. Back in 2003, someone found a small bird carving deep inside a cave in Germany. It wasn't just any old carving, though. This one was made from mammoth ivory and turned out to be more than 30,000 years old. It might be the oldest bird figure ever discovered. What's really interesting isn't just how old it is. The carving shows a water bird, but it has the head of a horse. That kind of detail makes you wonder what was going through the mind of the person who made it. It makes me think they weren't just trying to make something that looked like a bird. Maybe it was about something more, like shamanism or their beliefs. It's a strange mix of animals, and it gives us a little peek into how early humans saw the world. They noticed things like bird migrations and maybe blended what they saw with what they believed. It's not just art. It feels like a message from a really long time ago. The lion's mane is truly majestic, and it's a pretty incredible animal. I was reading about how birds, particularly water birds, were really important symbols in shamanic traditions. This small carving seems to back that idea up. It's not just a simple sketch either. The detail is amazing. So realistic you could almost imagine it flying away. The way the head is turned, the shape of the eyes, and the long, elegant neck all come together to make it feel complete. You have to think the person who made this would be honored to know their work has lasted all this time, becoming the oldest example we have. The oldest known picture of a bird that we've found is actually a small carving. It wasn't by itself, though. They found it in a cave in France next to a figure of an owl. It makes you think that early humans really liked making art of birds. Even though it looks a bit like the cave paintings made by Neanderthals, it turns out they didn't make this one. Researchers used carbon dating and figured out it was done by early modern humans, like us. The dating showed the carvings were made a really long time ago, somewhere between 28,000 and 35,000 years. It's funny how something so small can feel so important. These little bird figures give us a glimpse into what life and art were like way back then. It's a direct link to how someone thought and created all those thousands of years ago.
Every cave is a doorway, not just into stone and darkness, but into our own forgotten past. These discoveries remind us that history is not complete, it's still being written, one strange and breathtaking find at a time. Who knows what else is waiting, sealed away in the dark, just beyond where we dare to look. If you enjoyed this journey into the hidden depths, remember to like, subscribe, and click the bell button. Your support helps us keep exploring the world's most fascinating mysteries.